This is the study guide for 5.5. It's on side, side, side to side angle side. These are our shortcuts to show that triangles are congruent. We don't need 6 pairs of congruent corresponding parts. We need 3 pairs of congruent corresponding parts that are in these arrangements. So we're going to determine whether each pair of triangles is congruent. If so, write a congruent statement, explain why the triangles are congruent. So are these triangles congruent? I see a pair of congruent sides, and I also see a pair of congruent angles. That's not enough to say the triangles are congruent, but notice how segment PS is on both triangles. It's definitely congruent to itself. So they're not going to tell you that this is congruent to itself. You have to know that. That's the reflexive property. Of equality. That's what we're using there to get that pair of congruent parts. Now, look at the marks now. Are these triangles congruent? We have 2 pairs of congruent sides. We have congruent angles in between. So this is why they're congruent. Explain why. They're congruent by side angle side. Now, you need to provide a congruence statement. What is a congruent statement? Maybe I'll use blue here. The congruent statement would look like this. Triangle whatever is congruent to triangle whatever. Use your 3 letters. So name this triangle anywhere you want. I'll name it triangle PRS. It's congruent to this triangle over here. Triangle PQS. Make sure the corresponding parts line up. P goes with P in this particular triangle. Q goes with R. Q touches a side with 1 mark and a side with no marks. So does R. I meant Q. And then S goes with S. S doesn't always go with S, but it does in this triangle. You're taking this triangle and flipping it over. Number 2, we have a pair of congruent sides marked. We also have congruent sides by the reflexive property. But there's no way for us to know if these sides are congruent. And there's no way for us to know if these angles are congruent. So we cannot determine if they're congruent. What you don't want to say is no, they're not congruent. Because they might be. You just can't say for sure that they are. Number 3, we got a pair of congruent sides. We have another pair of congruent sides. And we have a third pair of congruent sides. If you have 3 pairs of congruent sides, these 2 triangles must be the same size and shape. They got to be congruent. So here's your congruent statement. Triangle PRQ is congruent to this triangle over here. Now notice how this triangle is isosceles. So there's going to be different ways to write this congruent statement. Segment PR corresponds with segment SU. So the Q corresponds with T. That's one way to do it. But there are other ways because it's isosceles. Number 4, we have 2 pairs of congruent sides. We have 1 pair of congruent angles in between those congruent sides. So these are definitely congruent triangles by side angle side. Let's write the congruent statement. Triangle ABE is congruent to triangle CBD. Here's number 5. You got a pair of congruent sides. You have a second pair of congruent sides. And we have a third pair of congruent sides. These triangles are congruent by side angle side. Let's write the congruent statement now. We'll call this triangle WXV. Just line up what goes with those letters over here. W is an angle between a side with 1 mark and 2 marks. Same thing with Y. X is an angle or a point in between 1 mark and 3 marks. So it goes with X. X goes with itself in this particular problem. Z goes with V. Last one. We have congruent sides. We also have congruent angles. Now, you also should notice that you have another pair of congruent sides. This side is on both triangles, and these angles are included between the congruent sides. So the congruent angles are in between, it's side angle side. They must be the same size and shape. That's what that means. So we're going to write a congruent statement now. We'll name this top triangle triangle LMN. And we'll say it's congruent to this triangle down here, NOL.